Welcome to Waterloo Filtration Institute webinar. I hope everybody is doing well, health, safe. I'm Christine Zhang, President of Waterloo Filtration Institute. Today we were going to have a topic on hospital air filtration and face masks to fight COVID-19. This is an open educational forum going to discuss hospital air filtration and face masks for fighting coronaviruses. We will have 6 panel speakers today, and we have 11 panel experts on site to answer your questions. And our first speaker today is Mr. Tom Justice. Tom is a well-known expert in the filtration industry. He has over 38 years experience, and he's a great friend, a mentor, and a leader in the industry. We are very blessed to have him today with us. So Tom, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. We're going to talk a little bit for this first presentation about hospitals and the activity that's taking place at hospitals all over the world. But give you a little background first. If you've kept up with the news surrounding this recent pandemic, you realize by now that the debate among the epidemiologists focuses on 2 points. And first one is how far can the virus travel? In other words, can it exist in an airborne state? And second, what you read a lot about is discussion on how long can it persist or remain viable in the air as an aerosol. So the World Health Organization, I think, kicked this off several weeks ago when they issued a statement that SARS-CoV-2 is not airborne and does not spread between people, as they said, more than 6 feet. But now we see other research basically disputes this, saying that it can travel further than 6 feet under certain conditions, and you'll see a lot of caveats to that effect. But also the virus particle can persist in the air in aerosol form. So this would pose a particular risk to individuals in hospitals, in nursing homes, anywhere where there are potentially large number of infected people in a confined space. So to take it a step further, it does in fact dictate the type of response that we will take in fighting the disease, but also in protecting our healthcare workers. So this second slide here, most scientists agree that the virus is transmitted through droplets of these particles over 5 microns. This occurs, as you see here with this gentleman, when someone coughs or sneezes, but also when they speak, they can emit particles. The much smaller aerosol particles are what much of the debate takes place over, and those are the ones that can stay suspended in the air. Next slide. So a new Center for Disease Control study found that the virus could travel up to 13 feet. This was, however, in a hospital setting, so more of a controlled environment. In another study, we see where a hospital in the Wuhan province of China identified viable coronavirus in up to 35% of samples that were taken from an ICU unit. Other studies recently, March 26th study published by the American Medical Association, suggests that the virus can travel much further than 6 foot. Another recent study, this one by National Institute of Health, found that the virus could live in the air as an aerosol for up to 3 hours. But again, this was in a laboratory setting. So there's many variables taking place here. While there are numerous ongoing debates, I think everyone will agree that by the end of 2020, this will probably be the most researched and investigated virus in human history. Next slide. because healthcare workers are exposed to higher concentrations of the virus, they face a much higher risk of contracting the disease, both from droplets and aerosols. There's several procedures. Intubation is one that generates aerosols we know of. Higher airborne concentrations recorded in medical staff areas, in particular, where they remove their protective gear. We found larger concentrations there of the virus. So now the debate goes on about, well, exactly what do we need to do in terms of surface sanitation prior to removing any PPE. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide.
It's not moving.
Christine, are you there?
I'm here, just not, sometimes
Yeah.
they're not moving.
There we go. Okay. So much of what you hear from the epidemiologist begins with one statement. They'll say, in theory, and with a focus on what they can say about the effectiveness of air filtration on other more studied viruses. You see two quotes here from individuals I know. The novel coronavirus itself has an average diameter of 0.125 microns, which is 125 nanometers. This particular droplet, the droplet in which it travels from a cough or a sneeze, are generally over 1 micron, so definitely in the wheelhouse of HEPA filters. Keeping in mind the selection of an air purifier or room air cleaner, you should always size this in perspective to the CADR, clean air delivery rate. And here you see room air cleaners, also known as air purifiers, which have typically targeted residential applications, are finding a place now in healthcare environments. When one asks why filters are incorporated into central HVAC systems, the answer I like is simply because it's convenient. It's convenient to locate the filter in a central system. While the HEPA filters can be effective on viruses, back up the slide, Christine. While it can be effective on viruses, the particles must first travel to the filter. So there are two issues with central HVAC systems. One is that the system cycles as demand dictates, so temperature is taken a priority over filtration. But second, many systems just don't provide adequate air velocity at the register to properly mix the room air and transport the airborne particles back to the filter. Next slide. So what you see here is an AIIR, which is very familiar if you talk to anyone on the hospital staff. But most hospitals will have an airborne infection isolation room, and these rooms are always filtered with a separate system. So the diagram you see here is an example of an isolation room that not only has a separate air system for the room, but also incorporates a HEPA filter located in the room. Airborne infection isolation rooms are negatively pressured. I'll say always negatively pressurized, or in the case of infectious disease, to adjacent rooms. But for those with infectious disease, such as tuberculosis, where it's negative, rooms are under positive pressure to adjacent rooms for those with, say, immune deficiency diseases such as AIDS. AIIRs fall under the requirements for airborne infection containment rooms, more familiar to people as AICRs. Current construction guidelines call for those rooms to have 10 to 12 air changes per hour, or ACH. And 2 of the ACHs in this case must be outdoor air. So the recirculated air must always pass through a HEPA filter. Next slide.
Sometimes this doesn't work well. Is that, can you control that? This is, from my side, it's not work.
You know what? I'm not sure. I could assume the remote control. Just give me 1 sec, okay? I just requested. Can you just allow me to control your screen a bit more?
So this one I cannot control sometimes.
Oh, should be able to. I'm not sure what's going on.
Mhm. Right.
So now I think it's under my control now. Before we're here, right? Tom,
Right here. Okay, this is the correct slide. So for hazardous filtration situations, applications, it's necessary that the filter housing be designed to completely contain the filters during changeout. The containment system you see here utilizes a heavy plastic bag to where you will remove the filter, the pre-filter, and install the HEPA and pre-filter. These are commonly referred to as bag in, bag out systems. Next slide. Okay, the hospitals, if you notice coming into this pandemic, which were the best prepared for the crisis, had three particular controls in place. One, administrative controls, so managerial measures that reduce the risk for exposure to those people who might have airborne infectious disease. They had in place work practice controls, including the use of infectious control precautions. Second, environmental controls, that's the physical or mechanical measures used to reduce the risk for transmission of the airborne disease. And finally, they had the handle on and supplies of personal protective equipment on hand. I think many of the hospitals we see were not prepared with the proper documented procedures. The next slide. So here's where the activity.
It's not right.
Christine?
What's happened? Come to the. Is that here?
It's set up on the people like this is the one. Okay.
Tom?
Yes, let's see right here. This is it.
Uh-huh.
So we talk a minute about temporary negative pressure isolation rooms, or TNPI. So this is where the activity is taking place. When you hear people talking about, well, they're changing out their systems in hospitals and installing HEPAs, in many cases, the hospitals or the service contractors that I speak to now, it seems like a daily basis, but they're basically putting in temporary negative pressure rooms. A lot of this, of course, comes with the demand, but many hospitals simply don't have enough AIIR rooms and must scramble to come up with these temporary setups. So if you take one example, this was just this week, there's a small rural 81 room hospital, and they've got 36 coronavirus cases. So they have to come up with something very quickly. And what you see here is they convert the general patient rooms to TNPIs. And there are two preferred methods, one possible method, but not preferred method. One is to discharge the room air through a HEPA filter and then to the outside. And this is what I've seen the most of. Second would be to send the room air through a HEPA filter and then back into the return air grill. Now, both of these, again, the emphasis is on temporary. So these are temporary setups. And I can best emphasize that is you'll see a lot of duct tape being used to set these up. But they're looking to prevent any air bypass. So surrounding the patient's bed with a heavy plastic curtain, and a lot of these are set up custom-wise, but you can also purchase these plastic modules that slide over the patient's bed. And in these cases, you'll see the plastic is taped to the floor, to the ceiling, hung in any fashion, but you've got a HEPA filter and blower inside the plastic containment, exhausting outside into the room with an opening across the plastic containment for the incoming air. So again, you've got a negatively pressurized room. But again, this is where the HEPA activity is going on. And we have video. So the last two slides just close. There's several reference manuals that you can go to. NAFA Guide to Air Filtration, another NAFA installation guide, hospital guides. One that I think is, if you're going to purchase one, it would be ASHRAE standard 170, which is now currently in a state of revision, but also you can get ASHRAE's HVAC manual for hospitals and clinics. Here it'll give you and I think Steve Nicholas will talk about this a bit later on, but it'll give you both the required MERV for different areas of the hospital, but also the CADRs required for certain areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker, Dr. Peter Tsai. Peter is a great colleague and friend from University of Tennessee. He is a very well-known expert in melt-blowing technology and electric static charge. His technology used for N95 production, millions of N95 produced based on his technology. So we are very glad to have Peter with us today. Peter, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tsai. We are going to talk about a little bit about electrolyte and the performance of electrolyte in charge decay, and see if we can do the deactivation of the masks and the charge is still retained. So first of all, they are basically 4 methods to make electrostatically charged media, including coronal charging, triple electrification, polarization, induction. Okay, polarization is basically to make the electrolyte for electronic applications. So these electrolyte made, the electrolyte made by this way is not suitable for filter. So my inventions include coronal charging and triple electrification. But actually during coronal discharge, the induction happens at the same time. So coronal charging is basically the combination of coronal discharge and induction next. Okay, there are 2 mechanisms to attract the particles on the fiber surface, mechanical mechanisms and electrostatic mechanisms. In electrostatic mechanisms, there are 2 kinds of forces. The first one is Coulombic force. That is to capture the negative particles by positive charges and vice versa. If the particles are neutral, then the particle will be polarized by the bipolar electric field between 2 fibers. So one side of the particle will exhibit something like a positive charge, and the other side of the particle will exhibit negative charges. So in this case, then the positive charges will attract the negative side of the particle, and the negative charges will attract the positive side of the particle. So these charged media will attract either positive, negative particles or neutral particles like coronavirus or bacteria. Then how about the charge decay? There is charge decay, but it is very slow at ambient conditions. That is room temperature, like 25 degrees. And from our experiment, this electrolyte is not sensitive to vapors or humidity. So that means because the material is polypropylene, is hydrophobic material. So basically, its water content is 0. So there is a water content in the respirator after you use, because the vapors from the body, because of the flow of the vapors, there is a dynamic force. So the vapors are forced to attach on the fiber surface. So people worry about if the respirator gets wet, is it still have the efficiency? So we will talk about that. Then heat will degrade the charges, but not depending on what temperature and how long. So we'll talk about that. And hydrogen peroxide, vapor hydrogen peroxide, already been approved by FDA to sterilize the respirator. And where it erases the charges, we'll talk about that. And you know, UV irradiation, electromagnetic waves like gamma rays, you know, these are common ways to sterilize material. And where they degrade the charges, there are a lot of papers about this already, and but that depends on the dose and the exposure time. So that if the dose and the exposure time that can deactivate COVID-19, those doses can decompose the material or partially decompose the material. A lot of papers already about this area, so we're not going to talk about this. Alcohol will erase the charges. Alcohol is commonly used to sterilize the material or the human body, but the alcohol is not suitable to sterilize the respirators, because the respirators, the key filtration layer is electrostatically charged material, and alcohol will erase the charges. So, and also in our experiment, soap and bleach will erase the charges too. So if soap and bleach can sterilize the germs, but they cannot be used to sterilize the masks because they will erase the charges. Next, please.
Well, it doesn't work from my side. Don't know why. Today, actually, we have a lot of people attending. Seems this Zoom have some issues. Joanne, can you hear me?
No, I don't think it's an issue, Christine. I think it's a TPT. How you, okay, you know what? I just give up on my remote. I'm going to request again.
On my side, I cannot control.
What don't we do? Okay.
It works now. Yeah, okay. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's this one. We talk about the charge decay at ambient conditions and at elevated temperature. And at ambient conditions, the charge decay rate is very slow. So the safe lifetime can be very long. And at elevated temperature, like 70 degrees for 24 hours, this chart indicates that the charge decay for N95 respirator only about 0.5%. It drops from 99% to 98.5% at 70 degrees for 24 hours. So the charge decay is not noticeable. So if heat can kill COVID-19, that can be a good way to sterilize the respirator. Okay, next. Next, please.
Joanne, are you on there?
Previous one. Yep, this one. Okay, because the charge decay rate is very slow at ambient conditions. So safe lifetime, most of the manufacturers of the respirators, their warranty is 5 to 10 years. Some manufacturers has a warranty of 5 years. Some others have the warranty for 10 years. So that means after 5 to 10 years, then the efficiency of N95 can be still greater than 95%. So the charge decay is very slow. And people question, because from our daily experience, the charges by friction, when you, for example, when we take off a cloth, then there are charges, but the charges will dissipate to the air in a short time. So people worry this electrostatic charged media, will the charges still be retained at moist, high humidity. And because these charges are embedded inside the fiber, so the charge degradation has nothing to do with the humidity, and the charges will not dissipate to the air. And people think, have the question, if the respirator in contact with a conductive material like a metal, will the charges will be conducted away? No, the charges are inside the fibers. So during our membrane process or during our charging process, the fabric needs to pass through a lot of metal doors, and the charge is still there. So I think the users do not need to worry. The charges will dissipate to the air or in contact with water or in contact with a conductive metal. Next, please. Next. Okay, this is the information from ENEJM, that's the New England Journal of Medicine. This information talks about the survival time of COVID-19 in the air and on different surfaces. So the reason I borrow this information is because the longest time that COVID-19 can survive is on a plastic or on a cardboard. See, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth one is 24 hours on cardboard, and the last one is 3 days on plastic. And the respirator is made of fibers. Fibers is the properties like plastic. So the longest survival time of COVID-19 on plastic is 3 days. So it should be 3 days on the respirator. So my proposal is if we can have 4 respirators and we number it 1, 2, 3, 4, then the first day we use number 1, second day we use number 2, and so on and so forth. Then the fifth day we come back to use the number 1 respirator. So it's been there for 4 days. So COVID-19 already been dead. So this I think this is a way, to reuse the respirator, without any heat treatment or UV, O2, something like that. So I'm not a neurologist, but the neurologist can do experiment to prove it. So then if they can prove it, then it can be a good way for civilians, for most of the people, to reuse the respirator. Next, please. Okay, people question the respirator can be reused, after a period of time like 8 hours of use, because vapors already been in the respirator. Will they erase the charges. If after 8 hours you use, or after a shift of use of the respirator, then the charge is already been erased by the vapors or by the particles or by something like different organisms. Then there's no way to sterilize the respirator and reuse, because the charges would have been degraded by the particles the respirator have captured. So we did the experiment. You know, I used 4 people to wear for N95. Okay, then we measure efficiency before use. Then we measure efficiency right after use. So because vapors are there. Okay. Then we hand them dry. Then we use 70-degree temperature for 30 minutes to treat the respirator and to make sure they are really dry. And then we measure the efficiency. You know, after use and dry, you can see from the table, there is no charge decay. And the pressure drop only increase a little bit or just about there. So basically no difference in efficiency and pressure drop before and after use. So in this case, then if viruses are there, then we can find a way to inactivate the viruses and reuse the respirators. Next. Vaporized or vaporous hydrogen peroxide already been approved by FDA. Has been approved by FDA to deactivate the N95 respirators. And so far, I think 2 companies making the machine already been approved using vapors H2O2. So, first of all, we H2O2 eraser charges. So I use 2.5 to 3.5 H2O2 solution. And I immersed 4 respirators into this solution for, let's see, I think 5 minutes. Then we take the respirators out and then they get dry. Then we test the efficiency. Then the efficiency is still there. So, and the respirator do not have apparent damage. So the sealing is still good. So if H2O2 can be used to deactivate COVID-19, then H2O2 solution can be a good way, you know, to deactivate the respirator and to reuse. And FDA approved vapors H2O2. So in this case, I don't know, they deactivated the surface of the respirator or the vapors penetrate through the respirator to deactivate the virus captured on the fiber surface. So that is something I don't know. But after that, I think if the vapors H2O2 only deactivate the virus on the respirator surface, that should be already good enough, because it can avoid the contamination by hand touch. You know, usually people are infected because they touch the outer surface of the respirator that has been contaminated. Then they touch their nose or mouth or eyes using their contaminated hands. So in this case, if the outside already been contaminated, then the virus inside the respirator, if they are not inactivated and they are still alive, I think they will remain captured by the electrostatic charges in the fiber on the surface. So and they are immovable. So I think even using this way, if the vapors cannot penetrate through the respirator, I think that's my opinion. I'm not a virologist, so I think it's already good enough to sterilize the respirators for use. Okay, next.
Mm-hmm. Joanne?
Oh, okay. Okay. Next. Next.
Somehow it doesn't work this way. Joanne, can you control that from your side?
Just give me 1 sec, Christian. I will take over the slide. Just give me 1 sec. I'm switching the sharing screen, okay?
Well, while we are switching the screen, and
It's okay. My next slide will be talking about sterilization by vapors, H2O2. Either the vapors to only decontaminate the respiratory surface, or it cannot penetrate through the respirators, then I think it's good enough to just deactivate the virus on the surface. Okay, so I already covered this slide. Then if we can come to the last slide on my presentation, then we will talk a little bit about the deactivation method.
Peter, can you see my screen
this
now?
one. Okay, that is this one. Deactivation method validated by NIH, to kill COVID-19. 4 methods: vapors, H2O2, dry heat, UV, and ethanol are validated by NIH to kill COVID-19, to deactivate COVID-19. Okay, and vapors, H2O2, already been approved by FDA. Okay, and I provided the information that 70 degrees for 20 hours will not degrade the charges. And from previous literatures about the temperature to deactivate SARS, that is COVID, that is COV1. The temperature ranges from 56 degrees to 75 degrees. Okay, so even 75 degrees for 24 hours, there is no noticeable charge decay. So then NIH, just 1 week ago, they validated that 70 degrees for 60 minutes, there is a typo, that should be 60 minutes, will deactivate COVID-19. Okay, so the temperature, the information of the temperature, the heat to deactivate COVID-19, I provided, they already validated, okay? And UV, we talk about it just now, depending on the dose and the exposure time to sterilize the germs. So different germs need different UV dose and the different exposure time. But the literature already shows that for some germs, that kind of dose and exposure time will degrade the strength of the respirator. So NIH validated UV is effective to deactivate the respirator, but the strength issue need to be considered. Okay, then the last one is ethanol. Ethanol is a kind of alcohol. We use different kinds of alcohol, like medical alcohol or IPA, they they severely damage the charges. So I think NIH validated ethanol, but they did not test the charge decay. So ethanol can be used to sterilize the material, but for charged material, they will erase the charges. So that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Our next speaker, Mr. Bob Mcllvaine. Bob is a very well-known expert in filtration industry, especially for his market analysis. Bob will bring a lot of good information, new information on face mask, and also Bob they have the deadly coronavirus market alert. So Bob, thank you. And with that, turn the microphone to you, Bob.
Well, thank you. It's been very interesting to hear the two previous speakers. And we can go to the next slide after this. There's a tremendous amount of information that's coming out on a daily basis. It's just unbelievable. And I think relative to Peter's slide, for instance, when he talked about waiting 3 days to reuse a mask, we have one article where a doctor is waiting 7 days. He hasn't been able to get replacement masks, so he takes the masks and places them in sequence, and every 7 days he reuses the one from 7 days ago. And relative to the decontamination, there's just an avalanche of information out there. University of Nebraska Hospital is actually using UV. Many places now are using the H2O2. There are all sorts of innovative activities going on, and of course, in terms of even home use, putting your mask in the oven at 70 degrees centigrade may be an alternative as well. But what I'd like to stress here is that all this information that we're gathering, and by the way, we have a 10-page coronavirus alert every day. So we've realized as we got into this that there's just so much information, and a lot of it is real-time information. Tom is talking about these taped isolation rooms and so forth. That's all extremely invaluable information, and we're going from the hypothetical to the actual practical all over the world. And of course, there's a lot going on in China, there's a lot going on in Europe, and it is, I think, leading us into innovative filter media technologies, and as you've seen before here, the deactivation technologies. But the point that we would like to make is that this sheltering and distancing alternative is a very poor metric, and there is a alternative which is more effective and safer and allows people to go back to work. And it needs to be employed not only in the healthcare industry, but by the general public. So, and that is going to make a huge difference in the size of these different markets. And so we are wrestling with the technology in order, among other things, to try to come up with how big some of these markets are going to be. So go to the next slide there. The one thing that comes in loud and clear is an avalanche of information that shows that the virus is airborne, it's being carried. People on the Diamond Princess are isolated to protect them from the virus. And then the HVAC systems ensured that 400 of them would be infected. And we're getting 1,800 out of 2,400 inmates in Marion now have it. You've got a choir in Washington State that did social distancing and sanitation of everything around. And in a 2-hour choir practice, 48 out of 60 choir members became contaminated. And the experts said that a singer is able to generate the small aerosols of viruses at a rate much, much higher than the average individual. And so something like this just ensures that it's going to spread, and that furthermore, it may penetrate, these small aerosols may penetrate the deep aspects of the lung and therefore be more injurious than they would be if it were something that were just in the nasal passages. So that's another thing to be thinking about. And just that the general public is being wrongly advised about social distancing. Can you imagine a voting line in Milwaukee where people are moving slowly in a linear direction, and you're creating a virus cloud that they keep walking into from the people ahead of them? And lo and behold, 7 people have now tested positive from those voting lines in Milwaukee. So there's an information gap here, and I guess the bottom line is social distancing is not a solution, but filters and masks and mitigation, decontamination, and other HVAC practices are. So we can move on to the next slide there. So we keep struggling with how big this market is going to be, and it changes day to day. But we do feel that filters are going to be a major answer. Local air filtration systems, such as Tom was talking about, even the average plant, whether it's and we're dealing now with the meat processing plants, and see that there's an opportunity here for upgrading HVAC, not only to protect the workers, but in the case of pork, to have the shelf life extend another 9 days. The potential for the media market is even more highly variable than it is for the systems and filters. And we do see major changes and improvements in filter efficiency versus pressure drop. Go on to the next slide there. So there are a number of new media developments that every day we're writing about a new one, and we're trying to understand which all those are. Just today we're writing about a cellulose nano membrane out of Australia, but there's a 2-polymer strong spun bonded face mask that's now being commercially available. You got the nanofiber membranes, charged and uncharged, and other membranes. You've got people like Cummins on their engine air filters is in collaboration with DuPont, and they're entering the mask market. So there's lots happening relative to the mask developments. Go on to the next one. So the analyzing how big this market will be for masks is extremely difficult under what we would have been if there had been no pandemic. Low would be estimate of what the market will be, and high would be a high estimate with the coronavirus. And these there's a tremendous variations in these, and the challenges for producers are going to be: do we put in a new melt blown line, or is it all going to be nano membranes? And well, I think we'll go into some of those parameters here in a second. So let's move on to the next slide here. So there are articles now circulating in China relative to guiding their mask media and mask producing companies, who are, by the way, have huge recent increases in production. Sinopec, which is the world's largest chemical company, has single-handedly put in melt-blown media lines, and then also worked with mask manufacturers to produce 12 million masks, N95 masks per day. Pardon me, those are just medical masks. But it's the scale of what the Chinese are doing. But the population of the world is 8 billion, and the Chinese media is talking about the likelihood that 3 billion people around the world are going to be spending up to 10 cents a day on masks, and so that's $300 million a day, and you're talking about $109 billion annual market for masks. So this is, you know, at the top end, this is staggering and changes the certainly the markets substantially. But if it is a way to solve the problem, get people back to work, it's a small price to pay. So move on to the next slide there. So we're looking at all these different technologies. Obviously all the testing is huge, but in terms of what a plant can do, say you're a meat processing plant or something, and you're Tyson, you're putting in walk-through temperature scanners. Even though there may be a privacy problem, I would think most of these plants would want to have some sort of contact analysis and all their employees. It would be a condition you got to sign up, and you know, we'll be able to tell whether you're at risk or not for having been around somebody with the virus. And then there are even things like the foot sanitizers that we're looking at. It turns out in a number of hospital instances, they put in these foot sanitizers, and the hospital introduced infections went down by a huge amount. So and then the Chinese have just come out with a new study showing that the soles of the feet are responsible for a large number of these transfers. One thing I'm wondering about, and because we know about this in the clean room industry, is that movement within the clean room generates particles in the air. And in fact, it really, you know, rating these clean rooms without rating the amount of movement in the clean room is unwise, because of the fact that moving in the clean room generates a number of particles. So even if somebody brings these in on their feet, is it then airborne as it dries, or people move around and dislodge the particles from the floor and from the shoes and otherwise. So there are lots of things that are going on that are innovative and can be used by hospitals, but they can also be used by food processing plants and any other business that wants to, or a restaurant or whatever here. So this is what the alternative is, and it's a range of technologies that will do the job. Next slide. So again, the ability of viruses to travel long distances needs to be, I think it's now established. What it needs to be done now is communicated to the public and to CDC and all these other agencies. I'm finding that the technology is moving along much more rapidly than government organizations can possibly keep up with. And so you're getting basically old and obsolete advice from many of these sites. And of course, the ability of the HEPA filters to capture the viruses, this is an ongoing discussion. And we don't really know how many people in the world will contract the disease, but we're finding as of even this morning that the consensus is going to be it's going to keep reoccurring like the Spanish flu did, which actually went through 2023, even though it was 19, 18, and 19, that there were major occurrences. So there's all sorts of these things that would need to be weighed, and will there be a coordination and a proactive program to combine air filtration technology with the personal protective equipment? The acceptance of a common metric to measure life quality impacts. I mean, we're going to go back to work, and and some older people are going to die as a result of it. How do you rationalize that? Well, we did a study for Cardinal Health, It happened to be on single use versus reusable gowns. But we had to come up with a common metric that measured harm and good in every aspect. And it's called quality enhanced life days. It's being widely used by Cardinal Health, and it does appear in some hospital magazines. If you go in on quality enhanced life days, it shows up. So, and again, the education of industries and individuals relative to the science and impacts is extremely important. Next slide. So again, with the mask, how big will the market be in the short term? Will the demand drop when a coronavirus vaccine is in wide use? How much will people pay for a mask? What will be the ratio of masks to protect wearers versus the public, or both? And this is where I would like to get a lot of input. It seems to me that the average person can wear a highly efficient mask, but only if there's a valve attached to it, and so that they're actually breathing out potentially germs and viruses, but they're fully protected and fully comfortable. And I do think that we do have to work out a strategy around that reality that people will not wear masks unless they are comfortable. And then what will be the ratio of disposable and reusable and materials, and then how you segment these markets by their use. Next slide. And we're already struggling with, what the projected infection rate will be, the population in all these different countries, mitigation policies, the healthcare and business structures in these different countries, and of course GDP and the ability to undertake effective programs. And we are looking at all the associated technologies, which I mentioned a lot of them earlier, but the decontamination. And again, there's a tremendous number of decontamination innovative applications that are going on just because hospitals are desperate, and a local company is taking on the decontamination one way or another. So there's a lot of information that we can extract that's real life rather than hypothetical. And then things like rooms and HVAC systems can be treated with UV light. There are UV robots that are moving around hospitals now, and they could be moving around meat packing plants as well. The next slide. And obviously the competition is something that we are dealing with and we serve the suppliers of all these things. And we're looking now at this huge production in China and the implications for the worldwide market, and the innovations in membranes and major developments in filter designs. What I'd like to end up with is what you're looking at on the left here is a picture of a Vogue mask, a mask with a valve. It's an N95 efficiency mask, but with the valve, people breathe easily. It started selling as like a Nike store. They have the Vogue stores in China, and you can go in and buy 28 different varieties with the highest fashion. And of course, you're paying $33 for the mask. But I do think this is a indication of what we may be coming to in the world. And if everybody in the world is walking around in a mask like this, it would be a whole new world. So those are my thoughts, and I will pass it along to the next presenter.
Thank you, Bob. Our next speaker, Bob Burkhead, great friend and my colleague as well when we work at Friedenberg Filtration Technologies. Bob is a top expert in air filter testing area, and he has tons of experience. And today he will share with us with some of the testing methods related to face mask filtration. Bob, it's your turn.
Good morning, folks. I just want to hit on a few quick subjects. I just want to check time, by the way. Jonah, did you want to quit at 10? I mean, we're past 10, of course, so.
Yeah, make it brief. That'd be great, Bob.
Okay. Just got a few subjects I wanted to inform the attendees. A key element that's going on right now, and I think you all are aware of it, is that there's so much interest in developing a media and developing finished mask products that we've literally been running 2 shifts a day and weekend days, just trying to keep ahead of the requirement for assessing the performance of these materials. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I've spent the entire day, every day, for the last month and a half or so, explaining how this testing occurs and the impacts of making changes in it. So I've written a few white papers just to send out to customers just so they can understand what goes on. But clearly there is a lack of understanding about what's happening in the testing process. Specifically about the difference in how you test a respirator versus.
Can everyone hear Bob?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
now.
Now we can.
Okay. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The last bullet point on that slide is the moving target concept. Both the FDA and AIIR are making changes daily and publishing them, and there's a requirement that they have to do this. Things are changing fast enough. I think Bob mentioned it, and Tom did too. And this concept of emergency response has to be maintained, which means daily they're making changes. So without reading the news and without paying attention to what's going on, you can make some huge mistakes when you're trying to develop a product and bring it to market. Next slide, Christine. So I just want to touch briefly on what's going on when you're comparing respirator masks to medical masks. But, and I'll get into those details in just a second, but I want to hit the first bullet point there on the right. The key issue here is I'm continually told that folks want to look at performance 0.3 micron and 0.3 micron only.
Bob, we lost you again.
Yeah, I think it's Bob's connection, internet connection, I think.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
This is
Okay.
start with the problem 0.3. Yeah.
Yeah, the issue is there's so much misunderstanding about when you say a N95 is 95%, it's 95% on what? Particle size. If you ask the general public that has done any reading, they will tell you 0.3 microns, or basically the MPPS if they've read even further. Both of those would be false. And I want you to look at the table on the left and go down the list to where it says the aerosol, excuse me, the challenge material is sodium chloride for the N95 respirator mask at 75 nanometers. 75 nanometers, not 300 nanometers. So, and then the medical mask, that you can range up from a tenth of a micron or 100 nanometers up to 5 microns or 5,000 nanometers. So the requirement of performance down at the bottom, that 95% on level 1 and 98% on level 2 and 3, is basically on 100 nanometers or 0.1 microns. So neither one of those is at 0.3, or even the MPPS, which is a common misunderstanding of this. So if I communicate anything today, I want to make sure you all understand, when you say 95% on an N95, you're not talking about 300 microns. You're talking about 75 microns, or 75 nanometers, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. a key element here, and when Dr. Tsai was talking about reconditioning these masks or cleaning them, the loading steps and conditioning steps in the test protocol are destructive. So when you test a mask, you destroy it. Tested mask by regulation is per the N95 requirements. So you have to make some changes in that test protocol to ever reuse the mask. So even in the Patel study that chased this hydrogen peroxide cleaning, vapor cleaning, they made some pretty serious changes in the method, and so have we, just to do a screening test. So if you look there where it says conditioning step and loading step, you'll see that it's pretty dramatic for the N95. You do an 85% relative humidity at high temperature, 35 degrees C, for a long time. You can't do that when you're trying to judge whether a mask has been properly decontaminated. And you certainly can't do the loading step. So both of those have to be abandoned when you're doing performance checking to see if a cleaning method has worked. There are pros and cons of that, but certainly the key one is the test cost and time and complexity is dramatically reduced when you drop those two requirements. So the point in this whole piece is to explain to you that, number one, there's a huge misunderstanding of what we're looking at in terms of performance on what size. And then there has to be some changes in the way we think on testing if you're just doing a quick analysis of whether a mask works or not after cleaning it. There's a lot of other issues that are key. The clarification on what a medical N95 mask is always a question I get. It's a marriage of the two. It's tested per the N95 requirements, but the ASTM protocols for the medical mask are also thrown on top of that to give you what's called a medical N95, or I think a KN95 when it's purchased from China. So, there's a lot going on there that people misunderstand. And I wanted to use this opportunity to communicate exactly what's going on. I'd love to answer questions, but I think we're pressed for time, and I'm going to assume that I'm done and Steve can take over.
Thank you, Bob. Our next speaker is Mr. Steven Nicholas. Steve is an expert especially in hospital air filter testing, and his famous quote is measuring, monitoring, and measurement. And on this slide, you can see a picture. Steve actually checked the hospital on the front line on last Easter Sunday. So with that, Steve, I turn the microphone to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to give you the cliff notes. I know we're running short on time. The 5 previous speakers, 4, gave outstanding information, which is well documented. Bob gave us some new technologies. There's some new information by the other Bob as well. The markets are changing. My presentation is really focusing on the details. As they say, the devil's in the details. These masks that Bob talked about and Peter talked about and the other Bob and filters that Tom talked about, they're only going to be as effective as their fit, as the installation. Filters for hospitals, HVAC systems, are basically the mask for the building. If there's leaks in bypass, we know that air will follow that path of least resistance. We're talking about 0.3 micrometers, 1 micrometer, 1 micrometer, approximately 125,400ths of an inch. We know there are very, very small particles that you cannot see with the unaided eye or using some instruments like a particle counter. I put up on the screen ASHRAE standard 170, focusing on table 6.1, the minimal efficiency rated by MIRV, the minimum efficiency reporting value, not rating, reporting value. They are clearly outlined, spelled out with the, again, the small devils and the details, the B, C, and D, those letters will explain exactly what you have to do for those application requirements and the proper space designations. There are 2 filter banks, filter bank 1, pre-filtering, filter bank 2, final filters. Again, these filters, if they're not properly installed, are going to be ineffective at the numbers that you're seeing. MERV. ASHRAE developed a guideline for in-field testing filters, actually the performance of the filter in its in situ, which is in situation, actual performance, taking readings upstream, downstream to determine the effectiveness of the filters after they've been installed. Now, there are testing protocols for the filters to get these numbers. The National Air Filtration Association recommends you get an independent test report to verify those MERV numbers. Bob Burkhead is an expert in that testing field. Tom Justice has a lot of background with testing as well. Again, testing in a lab, the filter is installed, if it's a MERV 7 or a MERV 8 or a 13, like it's a HEPA filter. There are no leaks and bypass. All the contaminants go through the filter. Well, in an HVAC system, when you're operating it, that's when things change. They're spelled out, what filter you need to use, what efficiency is required. The medias have all been, Peter talked about the medias and Bob, how effective and efficient the media itself is. Putting it through the testing procedures that Bob talked about, very stringent test procedures. Then when it comes to the technicians installing them, that's where the rubber meets the road. Filters with a MERV 12 in a healthcare setting, for example, have to have an installed pressure differential to gauge reading the pressure drop across the filter bank. Where the sensors are located upstream and downstream, that's the problem. I would say if there are 10 gauges that I saw installed, conservative estimate, 8 or 9 are not even connected. They don't even have the probes upstream and downstream. It's like one of those thermostats on the wall that are not connected, almost like a placebo, if you will. But it's not for that reason. It's just that the technicians have not been told, or it was never connected properly, and they never connected upstream, downstream in the right location. The second part of the pre-filters is the secondary filter, which is the most important. The final filter is the final thing the air sees before it goes into the occupied spaces in a healthcare facility. Other than the airborne infection isolation rooms that have their own system, these filtration systems provide air to laboratories, many times operating rooms, and other areas where patients are going to be treated. They talked about a blank-off panel. If you're not familiar with HVAC system, when the job is done and they complete it, a lot of times there's a space, 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, and they put a blank-off panel there, and they got to seal it up, which they don't. NAFA recommends you take that panel, put it down the opposite end, seal it up permanently with a good RTV silicone, so no way it goes through that, and it becomes part of the housing. The frame shall be durable in proportion to the hardware of the system itself, which is typically 16-gauge galvanized steel. So the real note here is the joints between the filter segments that have filters, gaskets, or some type of sealing mechanism. This is the major problem. In the final filter bank, you have a metal-to-metal header frame on a metal track slid in, no gasket, and that's your final filter. So without paying attention to these strict attentions of very small details, these particles that we're trying to remove from the airstream are not going to be captured in the air filtration system. So again, you need a gauge to measure the pressure drop across the filter bank. You need a monitoring system every other week, once a month, or whatever you check the gauges. And you effectively manage your system by approaching it in a very simplified measure, monitor, and manage system. Make sure the technicians get training. The Air Filtration Association, NAFA, has certified technician program. Most of my hospital accounts clients, we highly recommend they get trained and certified because of the degree of importance in a healthcare facility. And the coronavirus has shed a light, unfortunate pandemic, but it has shed a light on these small details that need strict attention. So that is my presentation. It's brief, it's important, it's not complicated, but the message needs to be communicated that you need to seal the mask, get it fitted, and you need to seal the filters and get them tested.
Very good, excellent. And with that, we'll turn to Dr. Gajana Bhat. Dr. Gajana Bhat is a professor of the University of Gajana And he is one of the top experts I know in fiber science and nonwovens. And without further ado, Dr. Bhat.
Yeah, thank you. You heard from all the 5 earlier speakers the importance of the mask and also what is happening to increase the production of the mask. We have been getting mixed messages, not just for the hospital workers, but everyone else. Do you need to wear mask? You don't, earlier message was, no, not everybody needs to wear mask. These days, as we are talking about reopening and going to outside, the message has been prefer to cover your mouth and nose and so forth. So next slide, Christine. So what do we do in this situation? Yes, the industry is working hard to increase the production of masks. Believe me, there is no possibility in the near future to make masks available for everybody to go and buy, N95 or surgical masks. But at the same time, not everybody needs that kind of mask either, because most of the time we don't go in the area where the a virus is active and likely contamination. So homemade masks do work as well. Now, again, you have to cover completely nose and mouth, use cloths which are not too porous, but at the same time use multiple layers, and make sure that you have good breathability. The important thing is the balance of breathability and protection. So again, it's difficult, what kind of fabrics you choose, but definitely something that is in the, not too porous, where you can feel, but you can wear for long enough time, comfortably, and you are breathable. Again, it can provide you protection so that if you touch anywhere where there can be virus, although you are practicing self-distancing, you don't go back and touch your nose or mouth, so that way you have protection. The other thing to make sure is that you take the mask, you don't wear the same mask, even if it's scarf too long. You wash them frequently and go through the laundry, and it will, no need to panic, but it is to take precaution and use common sense approach. And that way, you can have well-needed protection and feel safe, and also protect others from possible infection even when the probability is low. I will, let others continue because, we are running short of time.
Thank you, Dr. Bhat. And the rest of actually a few slides is a follow-up to our last seminar in February on Facemasks for prevention against coronavirus threat. We are going to very briefly go through, as we already mentioned, that face mask technology primarily based on Mcllvaine technologies, and we all know that Mcllvaine right now very, very short on the marketplace. So there are alternatives. Alternatives right now, there's 2 methods. One is nanofiber technology, and we already mentioned that nanofiber basically because it's a fine structure, it still can capture small particles. And another one is membrane. So use a membrane also seems an effective method to reach high efficiency and production for currently coronaviruses protection. And with that, let's move to next section, to our question and answers. Once again, we have a panel member here. We'll answer questions. Let's see what kind of we received many questions. We will selectively pick some. And first question to Tom Justice. Do you think the air in the hospital circulated? Tom?
I'm sorry, I have to unmute.
Oh.
Thank you. Yes, we're talking for a airborne infection containment room, 10 to 12 air changes per hour. 2 of those have to be outdoor air.
Okay. And one question, probably this is for Peter. Is the melt balloon degraded by autoclave?
Yes, that depends on the temperature. Autoclave, usually it means high temperature, very high temperature. And the melting temperature of PP is 160 degrees. So you cannot, expose the membrane fabric at temperature either in the air or in contact of the metal that is higher than 160 degrees. And the crystallinity temperature of PP is about 135 degrees. So in that case, crystalline already been changed. So the charges are believed to be embedded between the amorphous region and the crystalline region. So once the crystalline collapses, then it will affect a lot in the retention of the charges. So at temperature 110, 120 degrees in the air for like 1 hour or something like that, the efficiency decay is still within 5%. So autoclave, that depends on the temperature.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And one question, probably this is for Bob Burkhead. What kind of particle size do you measure at your lab?
We can go down to single-digit nanometers, so 0.09 microns, something like that. And actually, there's no limit on the upside. If it can be aerosolized, we can measure it. Did you hear that?
Yes, that's good. And some of the questions probably it's we were not able to address all of them, and we'll pick a couple of them. And there's the one question, probably this is for Steve Nicholas. Why not have all filters to be MERV 13 or higher?
Okay, good question. Typically, because system has the highest typically the higher the pressure drop is just across the filter tank. And that's the energy drop.
Steve, it seems that we cannot hear you very well.
Okay, I got my phone moved over. Let me move it over here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Better? Okay, sorry. I was charging it. It's a good question. The answer, the short answer is, but mostly it's because of system capacity. Filters were designed OEM with MERV 4, 1 through 4. Those are panel filters, fiberglass, polyester, or some medium to low efficiency pleated 6, 7, or 8 MERV 8 efficiency. When you jump up to MERV 13, it's going to have a higher static resistance. Now, to offset that, they electrostatically charge the media. 3M does it, Kimberly-Clark, and many manufacturers, as the speaker that talked about the mask, they charge the media of these HVAC filters. The challenge is the relative humidity. So they've done a testing standard with Appendix J, where they discharge the charge on the media to see what its mechanical efficiency is. But that said, I think a good MERV 13 filter, a MERV 11, MERV 13 filter, will do what the pre-filters do for most systems, which is protect the equipment, starting with the coil. If you seal the filter up, as I talked about, and you force the air through a MERV 11 or MERV 13 filter, that's your coil cleaner. That's what it's designed for. That's what it is there for. So if you're cleaning coils, it's the filter's not the right efficiency, and a combination, they're not installed properly. So why not a MERV 13? U.S. Green Building Council requires it for the LEED certified buildings. MERV 13 is also required for laboratory air and healthcare facilities. So it's a good number to use, but is it practical? It's not a one size fits all. You have to learn the system capacity and so forth, and make sure you have enough media in the filter, high capacity, to offset the pressure drop.
Thank you, Steve. A quick question to Tom Justice. how does the hospital safely dispose used masks? Tom?
Dispose of used masks.
Yeah, face masks.
But basically, we talk about when a service person, let's say, for example, when you're changing filters, you don't know what you're coming in contact with. If you go to the CDC guideline, there is a specific sequence of discount of taking the protective clothing off, gloves, mask, everything else. NAFA recommends that everything be put into a plastic bag, sealed and disposed of that way. The best way is through the hospital incinerator.
Thank you, Tom. And a question for Bob Mcllvaine. Bob, you give us some of the statistics on face mask, and how do you project the impact of these coronaviruses on hospital air filtration?
Well, I certainly think there's a huge opportunity to upgrade hospital facilities. And of course, with the shortage of masks that we have now, it's really more of a question of how do we produce more masks and how do we, I think, upgrade the whole quality of life for those hospital workers. And, you know, people like MSA are furnishing now some masks that are basically the respirator type. So using your imagination a little bit, you know, you've got powered masks with that would be more comfortable and aid the breathing and so forth. So I think there's an unlimited opportunity to upgrade the life quality for hospital workers at the same time that you're making them safer.
Thank you, Bob. And we have many questions, and during time limit, we have to move on. John, can you move to next slide, please? And just some of the information item. Water Filtration Institute, we do have a filtration and separation specialist certification program that will be start on May 5th. We will have in-depth discussion on anything related to filtration and separation, face mask and hospital filtration, also part of that. And we welcome each of you, if you have interest, join us for our next opening ceremony on May 5th with Jay Forcuchi, our Water Filtration Institute 2020 co-chair. With that, I want to thank all our panel speakers and our panelists for your great efforts to put the information together. Without your support, it won't be possible. And also we want to thank our members for all their support, make this happen. And most importantly, we want to thank each of you for your time with us today. And I wish you keep safe and be well and be connected. Thank you again. That concludes this session. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Bye-bye. Thank
Be
you,
safe,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.